closed captioning for the professors is provided in part by the Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury and wrongful death law firm in Chicago.
Homeschooling seems to be a growing trend in America, but does it work? And is it a threat to our public education system? That's the focus of our discussion today on The Professors. Joining us to talk about the pros and cons of homeschooling are Brandy Booker, professor at Kennedy King College who homeschooled her son; Yvonne DuBose, a homeschooling mom; Temple Hemphill, professor at Kennedy King College; and Nick Panamitros, attorney and professor at Kennedy King and Harper Colleges. Welcome. All right, so this is a very interesting and important conversation because homeschooling, many people say, is the fastest growing form of education in America. And before we get into sort of all the political arguments and the back and forth, I'd like to hear from you two, honestly, who have the experience of homeschooling. What has that experience been like? Why did you all choose to homeschool, and what did it really consist of? Either one of you can answer that for me.
Okay. Well, I've had two very different experiences. The first experience, I simply adopted the curriculum that the school in the district was using.
And that's a city, Chicago?
Actually, no. That was a school district in DuPage County.
Okay.
And one of the reasons why we went that route is because my son was experiencing in third grade a lot of discrimination.
Okay.
And even it caused him to act out. Okay. And they were trying to track him into an LD/ED program, which at the time I knew wasn't going to serve him well.
That's learning disability program? Learning
and emotional disability.
Sure.
He did not have a learning disability, but because his behavior was so combative with a lot of the behaviors he was experiencing from peers as well as teachers and administrators, he lashed out. Okay. And they were saying that, you know, they wanted him to go not just into a program, but an alternative school. So
you chose it really as an alternative for your son because of having some challenges, I wouldn't say behavioral challenges, but really in terms of perception and that sort of thing within the school system. No, you can absolutely say behavioral challenges. Mm-hmm. And I at the time was finishing up my graduate degree. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to, even as a single mother, because I know a lot of times we think of this as something that two-parent households often adopt because sure. one parent can bring in the income, whereas and the other one can stay home. Mm-hmm. But I actually was considered, for all purposes and intent, I was a low-income, single parent of 4 children. And my third grader at the time, he was 8. He was the oldest. Okay. So I did not adopt this practice of homeschooling for all of them, but for him, so that I could address some of the issues he was experiencing. And I knew at the time I had the free time or the schedule to be able to do it and try to get him back in line. We had experienced some major deaths in our family, as well as our family size was growing. And so he was emotionally struggling with a lot of changes. And I didn't want it to affect him being able to progress in the curriculum that was already set out. I didn't want him to be watered down, his curriculum to be watered down. Ivani, could you explain explain to us your experience and your reasons behind homeschooling and how many kids do you homeschool and all that other good stuff?
Yes, I was going to actually say on the other side of why Brandy did it was that my, who's now 10-year-old, she was 2 when she learned to read. And that was just, you know, answering her questions. What, you know, why are these letters grouped together? And what does that mean if I see that on a sign? And then putting her just in environments where I just wanted her to experience being with other groups of kids, and her sitting down in a classroom of kids and picking up the book and reading it to the kids, and then getting the response from educators saying, you're probably pushing her too hard. She's reading too soon. Or I put the book down, I was reading, and I went to talk to a parent, and I came back and I was really surprised, and she was reading to the kids, and that was actually kind of frightening, and you know, just different responses that seemed odd to me.
So your kid was too far ahead.
Exactly, and so,
okay.
right, and I started thinking, okay, is this how they're going to respond to her in school?
Sure.
And then I discovered these long waiting lists if you wanted to put them in certain schools where they would be welcomed. And I thought, you know what, we'll just do this at home and take our time figuring out how to make our way into the system. And then you discover a community of homeschoolers out there, and it's like, oh wow, I can do this, you know.
So so let's just, I want to throw out this stereotype automatically, because the first thing that people think about when they think of homeschooling, they think about your kids basically hanging around the kitchen table all day, right? They wake up when they want to, they eat when they want to, that sort of thing.
Some of that is true.
Okay, they do some of their work, and then, you know, they may work for 30 minutes and then they go play the rest of the day or go on field trips and that sort of thing. And I'm thinking, man, that's pretty cool. I wish my mother had homeschooled me for that reason.
Right.
But here's the interesting thing, and I want to kind of throw this out as well. I think it's very important. Most research has shown that homeschool students do actually perform better than other students in terms of academic performance. For instance, they did a study on college GPAs of children who had been homeschooled versus those who had not been homeschooled, and they found that the first year GPAs were typically higher. Now, homeschooling is growing. There are about 2 million people that are doing it now, and a number of, you know, for a lot of different reasons. So help us understand, and this can be anybody, for those who assume that homeschooling is chaos and you know, disorder, and that it is not comparable to public education or private education, please help allay our fears in that way.
Well, there are so many different types of homeschooling. There is traditional homeschooling, which is educating your kids at home around the kitchen table, things like that. I have a chalkboard on my kitchen wall. That is what my kitchen wall is a chalkboard. But then there are unschoolers whom I better associate myself with, which means is child-led learning. So I do not have a curriculum of any sort. I expose my children to as many opportunities as possible, and then I sort of pay attention to their cues, what they're interested in, and sort of move in that direction. Each kid is different, you know. There are Thomas Jefferson homeschoolers, there are Christian or religious homeschoolers. So it's all over the board. There is no one cookie cutter concept. There are even online curriculums, and the Chicago's public schools even has a curriculum online that you can follow.
Sure.
I just wanted to say, I think one of the reasons we see the GPA being higher or comparable to other freshman college students is because oftentimes homeschool children learn how to be self-reliant, independent in their work, understand how to build parameters and deadlines for themselves.
You know what, that's a very, I'm sorry, let me say this real quick and I'm going to come to you, Nick, but that's a very interesting point. If you think about the skill set that we learn in the traditional school setting from middle school, high school, it really is drastically different than the skill set that you have to have when you get to college. College is completely independent. The schedule is very open. I remember when I got to college, I was just jumping up and down. I was ecstatic. I was like, I don't have to be in class all day. I had class at 12, and then I had class at 4, and I go to the gym, and you know, it was really kind of fun. So you have to be self-motivated, and I would imagine that that kind of preparation would be good for dealing with that issue. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think you have to add into the equation the fact that when parents homeschool their children, I mean, the amount of time that it takes, nurturing, is part of the reason they're successful. I think that, you know, families that are nurturing, I think the students always tend to do better than those that don't get home nurturing. So I think in and of itself, the fact that, you know, you're doing the homeschooling, that you care that much, you're spending that much time with your child, is all going to push them in a positive direction and help them do better in college and in life generally.
Sure.
Before the taping, we were talking about the peer effect, and that is my main concern in terms of homeschooling. I think it's a great option. It makes sense depending on your situation. However, if a student is not in a consistent environment with other peers aside from family members, how is that going to help in terms of long-term socialization skills? And so
the socialization issue keeps coming on the table in different settings with homeschoolers. In the city, at least I can speak for, there is no good reason why a child that is being homeschooled should not have socialization. There are groups galore that you can find on Yahoo lists, on the internet, Google it, whatever you want to do, where your kids can get together with other kids and learn. So if my kid is interested in neuroscience, I can just put out a feeler and say my kid is interested in this. Some parent who happens to be a neuroscientist or something like that will say, I'd love to teach the class. And then I'd say, okay, this parent is going to teach the class at this time and this day, and how many other people are interested. He can only take 12 because the child to teacher ratio is going to be far better because this parent is going to say, this is all I can take. And then the kids will sign up. Sometimes there's a fee, sometimes there's not, and they do get together every week and they learn this subject.
Okay, but let me say this though, because it's interesting. The only major concern I have for homeschooling is the socialization issue as well. So, you know, my idea overall is I'm a firm believer in educational choice in a variety of ways, from charter schools to voucher programs, and I have a real hard time when the government says that you must be educated here and that's that. I have a real difficult time with that. And so, you know, my kids go to private schools, it's very expensive, and yet, you know, we believe in, when kids are getting Christian education, it's something that's very important to us, and so that's what they're doing. But the socialization question for homeschooling is the one that really stumps me as well, because even though the example that you just gave is an example of people getting together at different periods, inevitably in our work environments, we are forced to be around people that we do not necessarily always get along with. They're from different backgrounds, economically, racially, socially, you name it. And that to me is one of those untaught skills in education. So even the best educations in the world, I find, really don't prepare people for that day-to-day, man, my boss is crazy, how do I deal with him? I've learned all this stuff at school. So the only thing that I would really have a problem with is how, I mean, if the interactions are kind of, you know, here and there, and they're not sustained.
And that is what I was saying, Ivani, earlier, is that I recognize that students can join groups, but I'm concerned about that consistency. Because in the workplace...
more consistent with kids who are homeschooled probably than it is with kids who are going to school.
How so?
I used to organize our adult workshops for a homeschoolers conference and invited colleges in to tell us what they liked about homeschool kids. And one of the things they like about them is they're not in the house all day long. So they're out and about all the time, and they are socializing with everybody.
But with the same children. That's what we're getting
at. Not just the same kids. Well, sometimes the same kids, yes.
And that's the challenge that I think we're both mentioning, and it's minor, it's major but minor perhaps. It's the consistent interaction with a group of students, because learning how to navigate relationships when you may not like your classmate or particular classmate, that will serve you well, knowing how to navigate those relationships.
They have those same...
Okay, so that would be my major concern. Yes.
Yeah, how about, so in terms of socialization, the subjectiveness of having just the, you know, one parent or two parents overseeing this. You know, when you're in a public at a regular school, you have, you know, different people that are involved in your child's socialization. Here at home, it's just me and my wife, or you know, me, myself, and I. And you know, how does it affect the child? I mean, they're getting a very subjective type behavioral
go ahead, Brandy.
Learning there.
Don't we naturally break off into our own groups anyway, even in traditional school settings? We as children, I'm sure, well, I did experience cliques where we still try to avoid crossing paths with those that we don't necessarily identify with as easily as those who look and act.
That makes sense. But I think what he's talking about, which I think is a valid point as well, is he's talking about this question of instruction. So that if the instruction's only coming from two places, mother and father, or just one where it's mother or father.
And they may not be professionally trained also.
Right. Now,
we can add that. That's another variable.
Let me, because I want to, give me a second to explain this, because I don't want to go on either side. education in America fundamentally began with this notion that parents would be primarily responsible. So the first charter for public schools, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the parents got together and they were educating their kids already, but they wanted some more formalized education, but they always took real responsibility. And we find once again that every single situation in which parents are more involved than less involved typically leads to greater outcomes for kids. Parents are the real significant variable when it comes to education. Most research has shown that. So when I say what I'm going to say, please understand I fully recognize the role of parents in education. And I fully, as a parent, take full responsibility for what my kids learn. In all honesty, correct, I hate to say this, sometimes things that the teacher says. You know, the teacher said, no, baby, we want you to learn it like this, and that's okay. But, so I say all that first, but then I say to Nick's point, what if the parent is not competent in certain areas, right? What if the parent does not fully understand, you know, how do you deal with that? And what happens to the kid? And is the kid in some way, without having some level of access to experts, some level of access, are they at a disadvantage?
They're always going to have access to experts. The museums of Chicago all teach classes for homeschool kids. We go in and we sit down and talk to them and get them to organize classes for us. We have professors from different universities who will come in and teach classes. But
are all parents are they all as engaged as you are? Are some and so that would then tie into your question. You seem to be incredibly engaged, but how is that going?
But even beyond that, the issue of sustainability in terms of access to these professors. So it's one thing to go to a lecture once a month and get a professor to talk to you. It's another thing to have access to that person on a consistent basis.
You also have online curriculums that are available to you all the time. And again, going back to Chicago Public Schools, they have an online curriculum. You have to show up every week. Show up every week, produce the work that had to be done. It's also done on the internet. They're testing, things like that. So it's just such a wide range of how to homeschool.
That was what we did last year when my son was a junior. The same son who in 3rd grade was homeschooled, and we had to address some behavioral issues with him. We went through CVCS, Chicago Virtual Charter School. They use the K-12 online curriculum, and you can purchase it and go at your own pace as a homeschooling parent, or you can go through CPS, and he had to go in once a week, meet with his classmates. They organized field trips. They had a dance, school dance, and a few things like that. But he still was able to get tutoring and help when he ran into those speed bumps.
Go ahead. But let me say this though too. So that's very important. But here's another challenge that we face. And I'm going to move to another topic, but I want to say this first. The only other challenge that I see in this is that state to state, community to community, the expectations are very different. Now, that's the truth partially in education, traditional education anyway. That's why, President Bush passed a piece of legislation called, No Child's Behind Left. I mean, No Child Left Behind, okay? There really is no child's behind left, but anyway, okay? But the point is that was an effort to standardize educational outcomes. So where I do know for a fact that state by state, the homeschool movement, I think, may be behind the ball here on this, is that there has not been a consistent standardization of educational outcomes that I think would potentially help to, alleviate a lot of people's concerns about what children would learn, and maybe make people more willing to look at this as an alternative. But that's one whole question. If you want to talk about that, we can, but I want to move to something else in a second. But go ahead.
I was just going to say, if that is a concern for people, are we finding that more children who are homeschooled behind? I mean, because to me, that would be the reason to have that concern, because they're falling behind. But if they are actually ahead.
But who's gauging the numbers?
Well, no, there are studies, and I did make that point.
Yes, but then there seems to be not always, to add to your point, how consistent is the tracking? I mean, because you have options. You can go through CPS, or you can go through a charter school, or so who's really tracking the numbers? The parents, some don't have to register, per my understanding.
Right.
So if you don't have to register and let the state know that you're homeschooling,
well, here's what's happened, and this is once again true of traditional education as well. The parents that are more engaged, higher income, higher education themselves, they typically have better outcomes.
Okay,
and parents that may not be able to do that typically may have lesser outcomes.
But is tracking really, and this is to you both, is tracking important? Does it matter in terms of that would be my concern. I would be open, perhaps, with all that I've said, to perhaps homeschooling, granted the opportunity or the need. I'm soon to be married, and we're looking at housing communities in terms of schools already. The Chicago Magazine released the top schools in the city. So we're looking at communities where the schools are good. If not, if we can't afford a house or a place in those communities, then I would be open to that, right? The homeschooling in terms of options.
I have a question though that I'd like to ask both of you. What were some of your fears that you had when you initially were going to start homeschooling, and what fears do you still have? Not personally, but with other people.
You're not doing it any longer, correct?
This year as a senior, he did return to traditional school. He did his first 2 years at a charter school. Junior year, he did the CVCS online. And now this year, he's in a private school.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and it came up a little bit ago. His concern last year did become social. And he felt as if, even though socially he does not always fit in because he's not a typical 17-year-old, never has been typical, that he needed to be challenged and strengthened in that area and get off of Facebook and into the real world.
If he's on Facebook most of the time, he is a typical 17-year-old, right? But and typical really depends on the setting. But let me say this as well in that vein. So we've thought about it, right? So because this private school tuition is very expensive, and we have certain values we want to instill. We have certain things we want to put forward in our kids. But the reality is that we looked at this, and I got to be honest with you. The first thing we thought about was, oh my gosh, I love my children.
Yes.
But you mean they're never leaving?
Exactly.
You mean that I'm with them all day, every day, and I'm tired and I need a break? And so please help me understand that part of this, because I can imagine that parent burnout has to be a significant part of this.
It is absolutely a significant part of this. And one of the wonderful things about Illinois is that you can say, in the middle of it all, you're going to school.
Okay. Sure. Can you drop them off like one day a week? Maybe,
you wish, exactly. There is a Sudbury school within Illinois that, and there are other places too, other states as well, where you can take your kids to school 2 or 3 days a week. You put in some time, you pay a little money, and your kids can go to school here, where the access to materials is abundant, and there are people there who are teaching, and the kids teach each other, and it's a wonderful environment for unschoolers. So that's great. And then the other thing is parents pitch in and help each other. So the play dates your kids had when they were 2 and 3, they continue to have when they're 13 and 14. You still rely on each other as a village to help raise those kids.
Because think about this, right now the research shows that 20 to 30 million Americans, adults, work from home at least 1 day a week.
That's another thing.
And so this whole notion of work
is changing.
It is changing. And your son, once again, you're laughing about him sitting on Facebook again, but I'm telling you, this guy is a typical 17-year-old. Whatever he thinks about himself, he is in that way. Increasingly, people will be working in non-traditional ways.
They will be going to school that way, too.
And so this is not in that way, and as I told you, I've shared my concerns, whatever, but in that way, it makes some level of sense. Because, and I think that those folks, and it's interesting because, entrepreneurs work at home, and even those who work at home, 40% of them have college education, so they've been through this traditional education system in many ways. They have 4-year college degrees, and then they go into working for themselves, which I've done before at a period of time in my life. And it's a lot. And you're prepared. It's not out of the realm of possibility. This is what I'm saying. You don't have to necessarily have to be preparing for a traditional work environment. Homeschooling can prepare you well for, I think, even being entrepreneurial in that way.
And that's what I was saying earlier. I asked my son last night, who wished he could have been here, what did he see as the benefit of having had the experience of homeschooling? And this is not verbatim, but pretty much he said that he saw it being a benefit to him, and not only to him, but also the economy. He believes that as a homeschooled child, he's learned how to think outside of the box.
Very important.
And that small business, he said that small business carries this economy. And in order to be successful at a small business, you have to have problem-solving skills and take certain risks to go against tradition to really do well at it. And so he said that overall he saw it as a benefit, and that with the workforce changing and doing more at-home work, that he was ready to go.
This is coming from the same child who in the 3rd grade was tracked for low special education. And so that says a lot, honestly. And I know him personally, and he is just incredibly smart, incredibly smart. So it does really give pause in terms of this tracking on the other end in terms of traditional school.
Yes.
Well, you were able to do it. Do you think a traditional school would have been able to do the same?
A traditional school would have
not
been able to do the same as far as
accomplishment in terms of his
where he's at right now.
Acumen, his
honestly, like we've lived within the CPS district now for the past 6 years or so, and I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't know a lot of CPS that possibly would have challenged him as much as homeschooling challenged him to try to develop his own. He's really solid in terms of his identity. He knows who he is, so he didn't have to.
But you're also a college professor, right?
No, that's good. We actually, I'm sorry, we're out of time. We have to wrap up here. I apologize. It's a very, very good discussion. I did want to add to this, what you just said. I just thought about it. Sometimes the lack of socialization in certain settings is a good thing for our kids. And a lot of people want to get their kids away from certain elements within. And so that doesn't mean that you'll never deal with it, but the truth is that it does help them to develop their own identity, which will carry them very far in life. I think what I've learned from this conversation is that education is not a one-size-fits-all model.
Exactly.
And I think we've got to be able to look at different options. So thank you all very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
That's our show for today. Join us next time on The Professors.